Welcome everybody to our interview series. We are here speaking today with Academy Award-winning film and television producer Dan Jinks. Dan, we're so thankful to have you here. I'm Shayna.
I'm Jerusha, and we are so thankful.
We're just going to jump right in. So Dan, we want to know, how did you discover the arts? What was your first introduction into the arts?
You know, I was that geeky kid that was obsessed with movies and television and especially theater from the time that I was really, really young. Like a lot of people are kids like love TV and movies and such, but I was like, not only did I love the content, but I wanted to know anything behind the scenes. And if I had a chance to go backstage at a show, that was so incredibly exciting, or to see how a movie was made or how a TV show was made. All that stuff was really, really interesting from like, you know, I remember like being 5 and 6 years old and being interested in that stuff. And, you know, but all I knew was acting. So I acted for really through high school and college. And I went to high school in the Bay Area. I lived in a town called Los Gatos. And in addition to a lot of high school shows, I did a lot of community theater shows. And then I did shows that, I don't know if this still happens anymore, where we would sort of call it semi-professional, where they would bring in a star and maybe 3 or 4 equity people, and then everybody else would be local. And we would play the giant theater, the San Jose Theater for the Performing Arts, or whatever that's called now. Yeah. And I did a few of those shows, which was so exciting to be in a theater with 2,700 seats. And then I went to New York to study acting at NYU. And it was while I was at NYU that I started to lean more in the direction of becoming a producer. I actually produced a show my senior year at NYU, sort of about life as a drama student at NYU. And it was, for a student show, kind of amazingly successful. And I did it because I thought it was going to be fun. But when it worked out as well as it did, I thought, oh, maybe there's something to producing. And this sort of student advisory council came back to me and said, would you do another one in the spring? And so I did, and that also worked really well. And I thought I would produce theater, and I worked in the theater for a few years in New York. Like, this is my early 20s. I was a producer's assistant and a production assistant, and the kind of jobs that you can get that pay terribly, but I was just so thrilled to be working in the theater. But I learned that producing theater was so much about being able to raise money, and I did not have money. I was, you know, in my early 20s, and I didn't know a lot of rich people. And I learned that in movies and television, there are these jobs where you can be the one that helps a writer develop material, or you go out and find books and plays and ideas and articles, and can help bring them to writers, and then work with a producer to help turn those into movies. And so I got one of those jobs when I was 24 years old. And that's sort of how I moved up the ladder.
Lucy is asking, how long does it take to make a film?
You know, there is no set length of time. The 2 movies that I was involved with that were the most successful creatively were American Beauty and Milk. And those both happened relatively quickly. I'll give you the timetable of American Beauty. It was a screenplay that was in very, very good shape when I got it. It changed some, but in the scheme of things, it was a wonderful, wonderful script by a writer named Alan Ball. And I got it the very end of March of 1998. And I was shooting it by December of 1998.
Wow.
And that's pretty fast in the movie world. Yeah. And we wrapped it in, I want to say, late February, and it was edited, and we were in theaters on September 15th of 2019. That's going really, really fast.
Right.
1999.
99, okay.
I'm in my quarantine brain. Numbers are crazy. 1999. Yeah, not doing that. But I've had other movies that have taken years to get made. Big Fish took about 4 years to get made. I have a few things now that I've been working on for, 5, 6, 7 years that I'm hoping will get made, and that'll be the great success story. when it does. Producers tend to not let things go. We only get paid when something's getting made, and our job is to see a writer's vision through to the end. So I tend to stick with things for a while, and some things happen faster than others.
Right. Can you talk us through what the process is? So you first find the screenplay. That's up to you to find something that sparks your interest. And then all the way through, you're on set as well, correct?
Yeah. So I get projects in different ways. Sometimes I'm sent a script. Sometimes something will be my idea. I'm developing a movie musical now, and it was actually not an idea. The idea wasn't mine, but the area was mine, and another producer brought the specific idea, and then I brought it to a writer director and to a composer, and now we're working on getting that made. I'm developing a project right now that started as a book that was sent to me that then I brought to a writer, and then the writer and I went out and pitched it to streaming services, and we sold that. And I just read the first draft the other day, which was super exciting. I'm developing a project at Netflix. I'm not a writer myself, but I work a lot with writers, and sometimes I have ideas, and I come up with an idea for an animated movie, and I brought it to two writer friends of mine, and sold that to Netflix, and that's currently what's called in development. That means the script is being worked on. The writers have just started the third draft of the script of that. And so things come different ways. And my job is to sort of oversee more from a creative standpoint, the project from beginning to end. So I'm on set every day, and I am in all the casting sessions, and am instrumental in bringing the director on. Although I have one project that I'm working on right now, hopefully that'll be made at Paramount Pictures, and the director actually brought the project to me. There wasn't a real producer on there, and he said, "Would you be interested?" And this was one that we thought was going to happen very fast, and I've been on it for 2.5 years, and I've made virtually no money from it, but I'm hoping that once the coronavirus is over, we can make it maybe later this year or next year.
Wow, amazing. So how is being in the movies different from being on stage, like producing a stage show versus movies?
Well, I only produced one stage show. I produced the movie Big Fish many years ago, and I worked with the writer of that, a writer named John August, and we turned that into a Broadway musical. I'll be honest, that was the hardest job I ever had. Getting the book, the music, and the lyrics all on the same page, to all be sort of telling the same story. And to tell something that was, it was originally a book, and then it was a movie, and it didn't scream out musical, but there was something in it that we all thought could be a great musical. And it was one that was not a huge success. It ran for about 4 months on Broadway, which is, better than some, but that I did have to raise a lot of money for, but that was accomplishable. Just trying to get it all right, the right song in the right place, the right actors, the right timing, getting a theater, dealing with the marketing. It was sort of more hats than I'd ever worn before. Was my experience doing the musical that I did.
Wow.
And actually, I'm drinking out of my Big Fish the Musical mug, my cup of tea right here.
I love it. That's incredible. And yeah, you're saying, I think I read in your bio that you're now working on doing some film adaptations of musicals. So it's kind of coming full circle in some ways, right?
Weirdly, I'm working on 3 different movie musicals right now. One of them is this animated thing that I mentioned. Yeah. And then another movie that would have a lot of music in it. And it's that's stuff that I love, but it's a little bit of a coincidence that there's so much of that at this exact moment in time. But
right.
And maybe even a TV thing that would have a musical element if that happens. So who knows?
And you had, a lot of early success with American Beauty. I think was that your first film with your partnership?
Yeah, I worked for 2 different producers before then, and I produced a movie called Nothing to Lose with Martin Lawrence and Tim Robbins. Yeah. And that was the first movie that I produced, but that was under my boss's at the time's company banner. And then American Beauty was just me and my producing partner, and it was our company. And we brought it to DreamWorks, and we were the only producers on that.
I can only imagine you know, how much you're needing to organize and control. And how do you, I did hear a little bit about that you had some naysayers or people who didn't think the movie was going to take off. Like, how do you keep staying passionate and connected and focused in a world where, you know, we're always getting negative, you know, feedback and input?
You know, that's a really good question. And it very much came into play on American Beauty. American Beauty was a project that there were a lot of people who liked it, but a lot of people who sort of admired it, but didn't think it had any commercial potential.
Mm-hmm.
And our studio, DreamWorks, who I will always be grateful for, there were some people at DreamWorks that so much didn't see the viability. They kept putting up roadblocks and making our jobs as producers extraordinarily difficult, not giving us enough time or money. And I tried to keep as much of that as I could away from the set so that the actors weren't aware of it, so that Sam Mendes could do his job without interference. And then there was one time when we really just needed a couple more shooting days, and I wasn't getting it on my own. And I went to the director, Sam Mendes, and said, I need you to go in with me to the physical production head of the studio and beg for more days. And he said, I get it, and was great about it. And he purposely didn't shave, and his hair was messy. So he was putting on, adding to the show of it all, because the truth is we all were exhausted. Most movies you shoot over 5 days a week, but they're very long days. A typical movie, you'll be shooting maybe 13, 14 hours. We were shooting probably 16 or 17-hour days, which is very, very hard. And you have to give enough time between that. You can't wrap at 4 a.m. and call people for 7 a.m. the next day. So you have to have enough time. So sometimes we would start our day at like 4 in the afternoon or 7 o'clock at night when things got really bad.
Right.
And then, but both of the stars of American Beauty had plays that they had committed to doing, which is interesting that plays would come in the way of a movie, but they were commitments and they were built into schedules. So we started doing 6-day weeks, which is really hard when you're working 16 hours a day. I was so happy when we were done. But I'll tell you a fun story to answer your question. We were maybe 1 day away from wrapping the movie, and the director, Sam Mendes, said to me, Dan, I think you're going to be really sad when we're done shooting, aren't you? And I said, Sam Mendes, and Sam, I'm so flattered that you just said that, because I will be so happy when we are done, but I love that you think that I'm going to be sad we're done. So I had managed to keep the stress that I was dealing with away from him enough that he wasn't aware of how much I was like, oh, please, let's get everything we need. Let's finish this movie.
Right.
Right.
Wow. So something that I hear a lot from our kids, especially as they're going out into the working world, is how do you keep the passion of it all and the creativity of it all as it becomes then your job, right? And
You know, I try to only work on things that I really like a lot, because these things can be 2, 3, 4, 5 years of your life. There are some producers who just try to get anything made. And listen, I would probably be a much wealthier person if that was my attitude, but I don't know how to do that. I put too much into it myself, and I just don't know how to do it if you don't really like it. And if you really like a project, and if you really believe in it, then you want to do everything you can to make sure it's as good as it possibly can be. And I've tried to do that on all the things that I've worked on.
Yeah. You start with passion first, and find what makes your heart sing. I think there's a change. I'd like to think there's a change happening in the world right now, where instead of figuring out like what's the thing that's going to make money and then figuring out how to enjoy your work, but instead starting with a place of love and vision and passion and purpose, and then following that through. And the hope is that if you can go in that direction, it's going to deliver if it speaks to people.
Yeah.
Right? Like I believe that's the way the world would work better if we're all encouraged to find our thing and go after our heart.
Right. And on that note, what draws you to a particular work? Is it the story? Is it the people involved?
That's a good question. It always starts well, if there's a script, it starts with the script, and does the script move you emotionally one way or another? I don't really look for themes and things. Other people have said that there's a bit of magic realism in some of my projects, not in all of them. I like things. I feel like if we're going to go to a movie and we're going to pay however many dollars to go when we could actually leave the house and go to
Right.
movies. I really do believe in trying to escape the world that you're in, and whatever that is, if it's a comedy, a drama, a thriller, sci-fi, whatever it is, and something that moves you emotionally, that touches you one way or another. And I try to find those are the things that I look for. A story that makes you kind of. I read a lot of scripts and I hear a lot of stories, and every once in a while you read something that kind of makes you sit up and go, oh, this is something different and special. And I feel like this could strike a chord with audiences if it's done well. And that's what you try to find. And it's hard to articulate more than that, but those are elements that I look for.
Right. No, that makes sense.
Yeah. So Andrew is asking, what's been the most challenging for you in the business?
Kind of back to what I just said, it's hard to find good projects that can get made. It's easy to find something that you love that nobody wants to make. But that combination of, if you're trying to find something that you think is really, really good, and then trying to find a studio or a streaming service or a network that actually wants to finance it, that's the hardest part. It's hard to find those really great things, and it's harder now than ever before. This is an era where people are, even before the coronavirus, people have stopped going to the movies in the numbers that they were 5 years ago.
Right.
There's a lot of reasons for it. Movies got expensive, and people got big screen TVs in their houses, and streaming became so easy that people just got out of the habit of, when I was growing up, we would go to the movies at least once a week. I still see a lot of movies, especially in the fall, when I'll sometimes go to 4 or 5 movies in a week. But I understand that a lot of the public has stopped going to the movies in the numbers that they did. Now nobody's going to the movies, and I'm afraid that when this is all over with, that movie-going habit will have really gone down with people. But we'll see. But the plus side is that places like Netflix and Amazon and HBO Max are making more and more movies, and some of them are really good. This year, Netflix had made a few terrific movies.
Right. Well, I'd like to think that, the coronavirus, none of us saw this, coming in to this extent, but that's something that I know that I'm learning, and that a lot of us are learning, is that there's no replacement for community. And so, as great as it is to sit in your house and look at a huge screen TV and, have the music turned up and experience it, there's nothing like sitting in a theater, even with people you don't know, and having a common experience.
Yep, I agree.
And I'd like to think that when this wave passes, that we're going to come even more together, and be so much more behind really investing in our communities, investing in being together, and building that part of our lives. That's what we're doing in this time, is everybody's on Zoom. Everybody is reaching out, connecting with old friends and classmates, and we're all reaching out to the artists. That's where our needs are, is for creation and for connection. Yep.
That's all true.
I dream that's the direction that it's going to go, and I believe that it will, but we will see. So I want to go back a little bit about when you were in community theater, and when you went to NYU and you were a part of that world. What was it about the arts and about community that you felt like supported you or spoke to you?
Well, I'm going to go back even further to a really important year for me was when I was in 8th grade. I looked really young for my age, which can be hard, especially for a boy. I was very short and skinny and scrawny and not particularly butch, and I didn't have the personality that some people do to use that to overcome it. And that was a hard time. Seventh grade was my worst year growing up. I'm a big believer that we take a piece of who we are in seventh grade with us for the rest of our lives. Even as I've had huge success at moments, I feel like I will never be blasé about it because I always remember that seventh grade kid. But when I was in eighth grade, I was living in Miami, Florida, and I just had moved back to Miami where I lived before then. I sort of switched parents along the way, and my stepmother got me an audition at this children's theater in Miami, and that was such a turning point year. I was the youngest person in this group of actors. There were a lot of people in high school, then a number of adults working at this children's theater, and we would do mostly kids' birthday parties, performances over the weekend. But it was the first time I was around a community of people that were fun and were into the same things that I was into, and were embracing of me as a person, and the fact that I was really excited about things like musicals and things like Disney World and things. It was just a really important time for me, and that continued when I moved right before ninth grade, when I moved to Northern California, and I started doing both high school theater and community theater. That was where I felt much more comfortable than I did with the kids in my high school cafeteria, especially my first couple of years of high school. By the time I was a junior or senior, it got a little better, and frankly, I think theater helped that as well, because by the time I was my junior senior year, I started to have much bigger roles in our school shows, and so enough people would go to see me that I had like a tiny bit of respect, like, oh yeah, I saw you in that show. And so at least listen, I wasn't the quarterback of the football team, but people were acknowledging me and respecting me. And I felt like that's part of the reason why my last 2 years of high school were certainly much easier than the first couple of years were.
Right. I think it's such a common story. I know Jarush and I have, similar stories of like, we went to different high schools and we sat alone at lunch. I didn't have my people there. It's not that people were particularly mean, but I didn't feel like I had a place to belong. But when I walked through the doors to rehearsal, we were all different, but we all loved each other.
Yeah.
And I could look at these older kids and be like, oh, they don't look like my parents and they don't look how I expected myself to grow, but they're awesome and they're so interesting and they're so different and they're happy.
Yeah.
Or at least they're learning about themselves. There's an inquisitiveness that was so cool about theater people.
An openness, I think.
Yeah.
We're accepting of we're oddballs and we're accepting of other oddballs, and there's something kind of nice about that.
Right, exactly. And not just with words, but we do it and we live it, and we learn how to use all of that and create something together. So
Sure.
We can be so different and we can come from such different worlds, but look at what we're able to create. It's really an amazing thing. So Andrew, again, it says, it's so cool that you won an Academy Award. What was that experience like? Did your life change after winning the award? And if so, how?
Well, I'm going to go back to what I was saying a few minutes ago. I carry around that seventh grade kid inside me. And that seventh grade kid never in a million years, even just the whole idea of winning an Academy Award was so out of my range. I was such a theater geek that maybe I would fantasize about winning a Tony Award, but an Oscar, that just seemed so foreign to me. And the first, one of the interesting things about the whole awards season is that the general public knows about the Academy Awards and they know about the Golden Globes. There's maybe 30 award ceremonies. There's things that maybe you've heard of, you've seen on TV, like the SAG Awards or the Broadcast Film Critics Awards. But then there's like the BAFTA Awards in London, and the New York Film Critics, and the LA Film Critics, the Chicago Film Critics, and just like there's so many of these things. The Writers Guild Awards, the Producers Guild Awards, the Directors Guild Awards, and you're putting on a tuxedo 2 or 3 times a week for months, and you're going through this wild process. So I had some preparation, because American Beauty was, every once in a while, there's a movie that kind of sweeps the awards. And we were the movie that year that was winning almost everything, not all, but all the big things. And so by the time we got to the Oscars, mind you, I was terrified. I was not convinced I was going to win at all, but I at least felt like we had a chance. And so my producing partner and I were prepared. We'd figured out a speech that we wanted to say just in case. But then you get there, and even though I'd done a bunch of red carpets all that year, I'd never done a red carpet until that year. When you get to the Oscars, it's like times 10. There's just more reporters, and you know, I don't know if anybody knows who this is anymore, but when I was growing up, Joan Rivers was like a big deal, and you wanted Joan Rivers to interview you, and like Joan Rivers interviewed us. I was like, oh my God, Joan Rivers interviewed us. It's again, if you feel like that nerdy, unpopular kid, it is a wild experience to not only feel like, oh my God, I'm invited to the cool kids party, but I'm kind of at the center of the cool kids party. And that was just a wild thing to take in. Fortunately, I'm grounded enough to know that a producer works extraordinarily hard for it, but we take home the Best Picture Oscar, but we also take it home on behalf of every single person that worked on that movie. And I'm very cognizant about the fact that I was very lucky to work with a lot of incredibly talented people. And I keep the Oscar on my mantle, but but it represents all the people who worked on the film. And you know, there was a moment of 15 minutes where we felt like we were sort of had a little teeny tiny bit of celebrity, and then you go back to life as normal pretty quickly. Right. Once I was recognized in the supermarket. People knew me in the business. There were people in the business who I felt like weren't quick to return my calls before I won an Oscar, and then they would return my calls much faster after I won an Oscar. And listen, I'll still call some agent that I haven't spoken to before, and their assistant will say, does he know what this is in reference to? And you want to say, oh God, really? Do I have to like start giving my credits now? That happens. Show business is a great equalizer. It humbles you very, very quickly. And you learn to live with that humility, because it builds you up and then it knocks you down.
So you've worked with and continue to work with so many incredible actors and directors. And I mean, it's unreal. Do you ever have moments where you're getting nervous before you're meeting somebody new or someone that you like truly respect? What's that?
I'm pretty lucky that I've never been intimidated by that. There's only been a couple times in my life. I'll tell you a American Beauty story. Before Alan Ball, who wrote American Beauty, before his agent would agree to sell it to any studio, he wanted Alan to meet with everybody involved so that Alan would feel comfortable. So I brought the script to DreamWorks, which was our studio, and DreamWorks wanted to make an offer on it. And so we had this meeting, and it was me and my producing partner and the president of production at the studio and an executive at the studio who was a good friend of mine, and Alan Ball, the writer. And it was a great meeting, and we walk out, and it's just me and my producing partner and Alan Ball. And I look up, and walking out of the building is Steven Spielberg. At the time, I had only met Steven in passing. We didn't know each other at all, but my producing partner had been an assistant director on a couple of his movies. And so I kind of elbowed him, and he goes, Steven, this is Alan Ball, who wrote American Beauty, the script you read last night, hoping that he had actually read the script. We didn't, you hear, oh, Steven read the script and liked it, but you're never really sure. Well, it turns out not only had he read it, but he loved it. And he talked to Alan Ball for like 20 minutes about the script and Alan's career as a writer. And even though this was, I just brought the script to his studio, it was one of the coolest moments I had experienced in my career. And I was pinching myself going, oh my God, this is Steven Spielberg. And he's talking about the script that I brought to the company. And since then, I've actually worked with Steven on a number of things. But, and it's still, when somebody like that, you definitely need to be prepared in every way possible. going into it. It's easy to be intimidated, but if you let that get in the way of your job, you're not going to be able to do your job. Nobody wants to work with somebody who is intimidated by them. And so anyway, long-winded way of saying you do just learn to get over that pretty quickly. You have to.
Right. So, a couple things we talk with our kids about is something we already touched on, which is find your passion, find your purpose, find what, lights you up as a person, but also how do you then go out into the world and become professional? Kind of like, who do you need to be in order to stay positive and to stay focused? A lot of these kids are going out on auditions and getting, rejected left and right, and need to really keep speaking to themselves in a loving way and be their own biggest cheerleader as they're moving forward. So I'm curious, like, how do you work with that? And then also, what are some of the qualities that you see in yourself and others around you that you believe allowed them to become successful?
I'm going to tell a story about, I was talking earlier about when I was 24 years old and I had been working in the theater, and I realized that I just couldn't figure out how I was going to make a living working in the theater, not being an actor, not being a director, not having the resources to produce. And I couldn't figure out my path. And I decided I was going to try film or television, where I thought I could be creative. And I got a job working for, I went on a job interview for a producer in New York. There are not a lot of movie producers in New York. A guy named Aaron Russo. And Aaron was this enormous, kind of mean guy. Like I was this little teeny skinny guy, and Aaron was this huge, the big mean personality. And I remember like hearing him yelling at somebody with his door closed, and the woman who had been his assistant, she couldn't leave until she found a replacement. So she really wanted to find a replacement. And she said, "Don't be intimidated by him. He senses that immediately. He does not want to work with anybody who's intimidated by him." Meanwhile, I was completely intimidated by this guy, but I thought, I'm an actor. I can do this. I can fake it. And I worked on my posture, which I had to work on. And I walked in there and I was playing a part. I walked in there and I shook his hand, and he kind of looked at me like, oh, this guy I exuded nothing but confidence. And I made sure I did the entire meeting. And he said, I'm going to hire you. You got the job. And it was such a valuable lesson. And I will always be grateful to that woman, because I don't know that I would have had the wherewithal to think all that through and to know how important it is to show confidence, that even when you're not feeling it, because we all feel incredibly insecure and scared and nervous, and what if they don't like me? And you have to put all that aside, because that completely works against you when you're trying to get to that next step. Right. I understand that it's hard to do, but it's also essential to figure that out. And especially, I think it's easier for actors because we know how to put on a show, and that was the show that I put on, was being confident. Right. One of the hardest parts of my job is I get a lot of rejection. I will find a script that I love, and I'll send it out to every studio in town, and they'll all pass on it. I will. I had a producing deal at CBS for a while, and I produced several pilots in a row that came out really, really well, and none of them went to series. And you just have to go on to the next. Right. If you let yourself get beaten up by all of them, then you just won't survive. And you have to have the wherewithal in you to just say, okay, let me try something else then. This one didn't work out. Or sometimes you say, this one didn't work out in its current incarnation. I wonder if there's a way to adjust it so that I can get it to work out. Right. And that's something that is a very doable thing in this business. But it is not easy. And if you can't face rejection, this is not the business for you to go into. And that's a very important thing to know about yourself before you get into it, is that that is a part of this business, no matter what it is that you're doing.
Well, so are you still a theater geek at heart? Do you still love?
Huge theater. I go to New York several times a year, and I
Yeah.
will see lots and lots of shows, and it's the thing that makes me happiest. And I work I do it because I love it, but I also work a lot with people from the theater in film and television. I've worked a lot with playwrights and directors who come from the theater. I just like theater people, and I like that world, and I like those writers and those directors. So
Yeah.
always.
What are some of your favorite shows right now, or that have always been?
Well, historically, I like Dreamgirls an awful lot. It's always been a favorite of mine. A Chorus Line is a favorite of mine. I mean, like everybody, I think Hamilton is pretty amazing, and I love Book of Mormon. And there's a play nothing's on Broadway right now. There was a play called The Lehman Trilogy that I thought was really good from last season. It was about to open on Broadway, probably like this week. Nothing's opening. But I see almost everything on Broadway. I go back enough, and I've actually worked there a lot in New York. So when I work there, I obviously go to see as much as I possibly can.
As much as you can. Right, exactly. Do you ever miss performing? And do you ever perform still?
No, I don't miss performing at all. And I'm so happy about that. I'm not one of those people who does.
Okay, well, I have one last question for you.
Right.
And the question is, if you could go back and talk to your 7th grade self, let's say that little boy you're talking about, coming from what you know now and who you are, and in a way that you think that he would understand, what would you want to tell him?
This is such a cliche, but I think there's some truth to it. I would say it gets better. That it really does get better. And when we're in 7th grade and we're feeling unpopular and we're feeling confused and alone, and here's the great thing is that a lot of people are feeling that in 7th grade. Some people are better at faking it than other people, but it's a very, very common thing. And when you become an adult and you talk to other people, and some of the people that you thought were so together and had it all and were, Mr. Popular, Miss Popular, you find out that they were really insecure in 7th grade. You're like, oh God, I wish I knew. I would have felt much more alone had I known that. And, those are sometimes things that are hard to take in, but they're important things to remember.
Yeah, and I think it's good to hear, that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, that you might not be able to see it yet, and maybe you won't be able to see it for a year or a couple of years, but it's there.
Yep.
It's on the way. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's amazing. Thank you so much for taking this time. This is
my pleasure. It's fun to do. Nice to meet you both, and hi to all your the actors you work with.
Thank you. They're going to absolutely love this.
All right. Take care.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thanks.